Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks so much for joining us today for a really great program. It's going to be a fast-paced ride to the world of electric and autonomous vehicles. I'd like to thank our sponsor, General Motors, for its support of today's conversations. Climate change, rapid advances in technology, and the drive for innovation are leading to a big shift in the world of automobiles. Autonomous vehicles are slowly but steadily moving from science fiction to reality. I know the reality because I've been in some of them. And in the next decade or so, the expectation is that zero-emission cars, trucks, and buses could become more the norm than the exception. But how do we get there? The answer to that question lies with batteries and chips, electric charging stations, safety technology, affordability, and smart regulation. We will unpack all of that with a terrific group of experts and leaders in this space. But before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events. That's at The Hill Events. But more importantly is the hashtag The Hill EVAV. The Hill EVAV. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. We already have a lot. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. And I'm told don't throw your computer out the window, just refresh the page. And I think that will fix your problem. My first guest is Congressman Bob Latta from Ohio. He's a great friend of the Hill. He's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. He's also the author of the SelfDrive Act, which aims to establish a national framework for autonomous vehicles. Congressman, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you about the SelfDrive Act. What do we need? What does it do? And why does the nation need it?
Well, first, thanks very much for having me on. And it's really important. I'd really love to say that this would have been done 2 Congresses ago. We had it through the House on the 115th, and we're just not seeing things moving right now. But I think it's important that when you think about self-drive for multiple reasons. Number one, it's a safety issue out there. Highway deaths are going up, not down. When you think of over 37,000 people being killed in highway accidents, 94% of all the accidents out there today are because of driver error. And, we want to make sure that as we move forward, that the technology that we have is being developed here in the United States. And that's really important because, again, we want people to be absolutely sure when they get in that vehicle that the car has been tested and it's proper and they know that it's safe. And that's what we did in the legislation. In the legislation, first of all, we listened to people, we listened to companies, we listened to each other. Staff alone had over 300 meetings on this legislation, which is unbelievable. And I was out not only here in Washington but around the country talking with different companies and wanting to make sure that people that we had to have in the legislation. So when you think of what's in the bill, first of all, we had to have a federal preemption standard out there because you can't have an automobile, going across the state and you get to one end to the other, and it says it's going to shut off from the self-drive mode in 5 miles if you got too close to the border. And so from the preemption to the safety, I emphasized to everyone that these cars had to be as safe or safer than anything else on the market today. And it was safety first, safety last, safety always. There's a cybersecurity component in the legislation because, again, with everything going on today, we wanted to make sure that the vehicles were safe out there on the cyber side. Privacy is another big issue and that we wanted to take into account. But then you look at the people that not just on the safety side of bringing down highway accidents and deaths, but we also wanted to make sure that we helped different segments of our population out there, senior citizens. That when seniors might have to give up their vehicle, they'd have an opportunity to still be mobile and get around without being reliant on someone else. Then those with disabilities, it's really important. When I was the chair of the subcommittee when we brought the legislation through, that my vice chair, their son, if they didn't have a means of being there to get him to work every day, he couldn't get to work. So, if you have a self-drive vehicle, then that would happen. But, right now, a lot of people don't realize that when you think about self-drive, that, if you watch a lot of sporting events or just TV in general, that people are seeing a lot of vehicles already at a level 2. And but as we go forward, there'll be a 3 and a 4 and a 5 where you'll be in a vehicle that will just be transporting you, that you won't be driving. You'll just be a passenger.
Is there enough overlap, convergence of spending and infrastructure support in the infrastructure bill with what we're talking about today? Are you satisfied with what the infrastructure bill, by way of creating that ecosystem, by which we may, take EVs and AVs a step forward and transform transportation for so many? I mean, you also describe things like cyber and privacy, other dimensions that are way beyond kind of what cars used to be.
Well, that's why it's important. I think with the legislation, we get this legislation passed because, again, when we worked it through committee, and again, this is a very complicated piece of legislation. And when you think coming through the Energy and Commerce Committee with everything that we did, this bill passed out unanimously. And again, that's because I reached across the aisle, worked with the Democrats on the committee, listened to their concerns to get out what we had to do. And then when the bill went to the floor, it passed by voice, which is, I almost fainted when I was down there on the floor with the legislation. And so this is why it's important that it's got to get done. But, when it went over to the Senate, the trial attorneys had issues with the legislation, and that they didn't move then over to the Senate. But we don't want to get behind here because, again, the Chinese are testing right now in California. You think of where the Japanese, the Europeans are. And we want this technology to be developed here in the United States. And this is why it's so important, because this technology is moving so quickly that I know that everyone I talked with, I'd always ask them the same question. Are you where you thought you would be 5 years ago? And everybody said the exact same thing. No, we're much farther ahead. So this is why it's important that we get out there and get this done. And, I think that, if we don't see things happening in this Congress, I know the beginning of the next Congress, I'm going to be right off the bat with it again, that this is a piece of legislation that has to move.
Congressman, you mentioned China and what's going on there. I had an experience a few years ago where I don't remember the name of the highway, but it's the largest pontoon bridge. It's salmon friendly. It links two parts of sort of Seattle, Washington. It's very important for a lot of the workers at Microsoft, and they did it. But it took 15 years and $8 billion to do what was then, I think, the third largest infrastructure project in the nation. And it would occur to me that every 2 weeks, China has one of those. So I'm just interested in the slowness of progress. So as we're looking at EV charging stations around the nation, as we look at the infrastructure that's needed to move forward by way of taking a lot of the technology and product which is being developed and produced in your district, but move it nationally, are we just moving too slowly?
Well, when you think on the EV side, there's a debate out there, where we should be going with EVs and how fast. But, I say this, it's not the federal government's, to be out there telling the American people what they should or shouldn't be driving. I think that the market will make that decision for them, what product they should be developing. But, you're right about how this would be progressing because, again, we've had hearings in committee. And the problem you run into is where you're going to get the rare earth minerals from, and so when you're looking at maybe 80, 85, 90% of rare earth minerals right now coming from China, that's not a very good, reliable source out there that we should be relying on. But we should be doing it here. But, there's always the conflict because I believe if we have to have mining being done here to get those minerals, we should be doing it. And we had a hearing probably less than 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. That one of the questions that was brought up was how long would it take to open up a mine in this country? It could be about 10 years by the time you find the site, you used to go through the regulatory process. Well, 10 years is a long time. And one of those that were testifying from the big three that day said, well, what we'd like to do is recycle these batteries. Well, if you're going to recycle the batteries, first of all, you got to have the rare earth minerals to begin with to get them into the battery. And then you bring up the point about the charging stations, and then you have to have the infrastructure in place. And that's absolutely essential. You're going to have is, bringing out that infrastructure. And then how much more power are we going to have? And, some of the reports I've seen are 5 to 10% more power if you go all EV. So, not only are you going to have the charging stations and the ability to get that power from point A to point B, but then you're going to have to generate that power. And that's where another debate is. And I've always been of what we developed here in the House on the Republican side back in 2008 and all the above energy policy so that we can have that power when we need it.
Congressman, I would like to ask you about, we have a question here from Grant Seifert called, from the Board of Directors of Connected Nation. And he asked, how is Made in America being applied to this industry? And you said Made in America is something, buying American is something President Biden talked about. And I guess, my concern about that is you're hearing more and more and more about that, but there's not a major multinational firm that I know, or even a major big firm, doesn't even have to be a multinational, that isn't wired into the world in some way. And gravity took us there because of all sorts of reasons, as you got permitting, regulation, what you need when you get it, labor costs, stability of price, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, how do we get it right so that we're onshoring, that we're bringing more of this back to the United States, but we're also not becoming flat earthers in the process and becoming so anti-international that we undermine our efforts?
Well, it's a good point because, when you look at what happened with COVID, supply chain, we've seen just things, look at the chip shortage we have. And, fortunately in the state of Ohio, with Intel, in a few years, we're going to be producing chips because I know in another hearing we were having that, talking about chips that I think we're at about 13% right now. By the time that factory could be up and running, we might be down about 9% of all the chips being manufactured in the world would be in the United States. So, you have to make sure that we have that supply chain. And, it's not that you're cutting off everything from around the globe, but again, it's just like, first of all, where are you going to get the minerals from? And I know when I've met with folks in the Canadian government, Canada right now, they're pretty much mapping out the country up there as to where they can find different minerals and having those in regions. And I think that in this country, again, it's kind of like, we don't want any of that happening here, so we're going to rely on somebody else. We can't do that. And that's why we have to have, the mining going on to get the minerals we have to have, because you look at these percentages, we're way low on what we'd be providing. So I'm a firm believer that we have to make sure that we shore things up and we make sure that we can have the absolutely essential things being manufactured or mined here in the United States that we can produce. Because again, the United States is, we can manufacture anything. I have 86,000 manufacturing jobs in my district. And when I look across Ohio with the Transportation Resource Center, which is a world-class testing facility, Honda just put in a massive new wind tunnel down there for testing. All these things a lot of it can be done here. But again, it's making sure that we do have that supply chain so we can get that product developed and to the market then.
Congressman, we have a question for you from the audience from Emily Schmidlin. Emily?
Hi, my name is Emily Schmidlin. I'm a government relations and policy specialist with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell in DC. Autonomous vehicles have potential to be both transformative and disruptive in the transportation industry over the next decade or more. We've seen some states take limited action, but there remains no federal framework governing the deployment of autonomous vehicles. Is there a timeline that we can expect to see some kind of federal action on this, whether that be through NHTSA and regulation or a comprehensive federal framework? Thank you.
Sounds like a perfect question for the Congressman. That's what you've been working on.
Well, I tell you what, my answer is that we should have had this done in the 115th Congress. That we had the legislation done, but we're just going to have to. Unfortunately, I have not let this thing slow up. I keep working on it, keep meeting with the companies and individuals out there in this, and so we have to have a comprehensive piece of legislation. You can't do this piecemeal. We have to have it all in one place because right now, when you think of an automobile on the road today, it's pretty much bumper to bumper. What the federal government is requiring, but we don't want to take those things away from the states that the states do. But I'm hoping, and my hope is that in the beginning of the next Congress that we can get this legislation through and signed. Because again, every day that we don't get something done and delay, we're falling behind someplace else in the rest of the world. So I want to see it get done. When you put a lot of work into something, and I tell you, like I said, when the staff at that time put over 300 meetings into this legislation, we want to get it done. But I think that
and it was bipartisan voice vote. I mean, it was bipartisan voice vote, right? And I mean, what I heard, just real quick, I just heard you blame the lawyers in the Senate for this not having gone forward. Is there somebody else to blame?
Not the lawyers in the Senate, but the trial attorneys.
The trial attorneys
killed the bill.
I see. And is there anybody in particular you want to call out that might want to, broaden their aperture?
Well, again, I think everybody's going to have to look at this legislation. And because, again, I know that I can remember one hearing when Greg Walden was still on the committee, him asking specific questions about, what happened over in the Senate. But again, I'm looking at it this way. We got to get it done. And, I was always happy to sit down with anybody to work on this legislation. But again, it's just what we have to do. We got to get it done.
Well, thank you very, very much for your candor and your thoughts on this and your leadership. Congressman Bob Latta, ranking member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. His district is in this game a lot in Ohio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks very much. Have a wonderful day.